Perfect. And as mentioned, my name is Michelle Horvath. I serve as the Assistant Dean of Students, and my primary area is student conduct and academic integrity. So I'm going to go over some of the things that are really important for parents and support persons to know about the process so they can help support their Panther and have a successful experience at FIU. So during our conversation, we're going to go over what the actual student conduct and honor code is and what student conduct and academic integrity, that's our office abbreviations, SCAI. And then really focus on the ways to help your Panther be successful at FIU. The very first thing that's important to know is that the Student Code of Conduct and Honor Code is a set of standards and expectations for the FIU student, organization, and community. And it's the idea we want certain behavioral and academic matters to be handled in a way that reflects credit upon our degree and is a safe environment for our students to learn and grow in. It's not limited to FIU's campus boundaries. So if we get a report from Australia from a student who's on study abroad, that's within our jurisdiction. These cover academic, non-academic, and Title IX violations. And sanctions under the code can include educational sanctions, exclusion from housing, grade penalties on the assignment, overall course penalties, suspension, and ultimately up to expulsion. So some of the common academic misconduct cases we see are academic dishonesty. And so this is things like group chats and WhatsApp and things of that nature in which they're just not concordant to the idea that a student's academic work needs to reflect their own or needs to be credited from the person who they took the resource or the knowledge is from. Bribery, so paying somebody else to do an assignment. Cheating, this can be something as small as copying one multiple choice to cheating on final thesis papers and master's theses. Commercial use, which means that they would be selling or purchasing stock or standard tests and answers. Complicity, this is really important. This is that sort of, if everybody's jumping off the bridge, and even if you don't jump off the bridge, if you're there and you don't stop them from doing that, we think that's a violation of our code because we're trying to teach our Panthers to be active citizens, that they're not passive, that they're not going to just watch rules get violated. Falsification of records, as well as plagiarism. These are the common AI cases that we see. When it comes to student conduct, it should be no surprise that alcohol violations up there. That is sort of the bread and butter of any student conduct office because our students are experimenting, right? And we live in Miami and it's a very social climate. And so we do see a lot of alcohol violations that are underage. And we also have to remember from students who are coming here from countries in which the drinking age is not 21. This is sometimes where we see that there's just a little bit of a knowledge gap that we have an inadvertent policy violation. Disruptive conduct, drug use, possession, and paraphernalia. I want to make sure if your student is on medical marijuana, that our campus is still a drug-free campus. And so if that's something that you need to speak with Student Disability Services and Disability Resource Center, please make sure that your student does take that on themselves. Failure to comply, fraud, falsification, violations of housing policies, so things like having candles or propping doors or covering smoke detectors. Those are some of the housing policy violations that we see. Physical violence, so that kind of punching, altercation, shoving, those are things that we do not want in our community. And some of our Title IX violations included stalking, sexual misconduct, all the way including and up to sexual battery and sexual non-consensual sex, trespassing, and weapons. So for those students who are maybe coming from out of town and they're hunters or they're Boy Scouts and they're used to having a knife on them or sort of a Swiss Army knife, please make sure that they're encouraged to look into the student code to make sure that they're aware of those. And if there's any questions, please direct them to our office. So usually when student conduct comes on, this is the place where people kind of either groan or think about this double secret probation that we hear from movies. But I want to point out that what we do is we don't look around campus for code violations. We have much too much work and the reports come to us. We don't seek out the reports. We don't prosecute a student. This isn't something that we would send someone to jail, that we're going to have this criminal proceeding. This is at the heart an educational administrative process. Can it sometimes look like it's a adversarial process because of some of the systems in place? It is, but ultimately we're recognizing that individuals are growing and they're learning and they're developing new skills, and sometimes that means there's a push against the rules that are in place. So as noted, our office is entrusted from the Board of Trustees for the responsibility and authority providing a student conduct system. As I shared, we receive reports of alleged allegations which may violate the code. We recommend and implement interim measures. So if your child is saying, I have fear of my safety on campus, this is a really rare occasion because our campus is one of those wonderfully safe and collegial and family-oriented atmospheres. But there are times when maybe under circumstances, folks don't understand that no means no, or there might be aspects in which there's familiar or domestic aspects that we can take some measures to help keep the students safe. We investigate allegations and meet with students. We try to understand why the behavior occurred and what led the student to make the choice that they did. I think it's important, and especially as we're thinking about students transitioning to the next stage of adulthood, is that we'll never tell a student not to do anything. We're saying that if you're going to make the choice that you're going to take, there's also the responsibility and consequence of that. I know that's a little bit different, but it is part of the growing up and moving forward process that we need to help them get to. We'll recommend sanctions. We do university programming, and if your student is someone who is interested in serving in conduct boards or being part of the system, that's another great way for them to get involved. I also want to point out that if your student experiences any trouble on campus, please direct them to our office to report. Not only is the police office a great place to report an allegation, but the student conduct office is another key resource. So I know as you're sitting here and you've gone through some of these orientations, what's really important for us to think about, how can you help your Panther be successful under the code? And there's two categories that I think of. I think of prevention and I think of support. When it comes to prevention, the most important thing is just have the conversation first. Some of the questions that I encourage parents or family members or friends who are sitting in this session is to say, what type of reputation do you want to have? Right? Especially for students who are transitioning from high school where maybe they were already pigeonholed into one aspect and this is a fresh start. What does thinking ahead look like in the collegiate setting? How are you focusing on long-term goals versus short-term decisions, right? Not studying on a Friday night. Maybe a lot of fun if your friends are out, but if it's going to create an opportunity for academic integrity violations, that's probably not going to help the long-term goals. I always ask parents and support folks to ask your Panther about the types of friendships they're developing. And sort of that antenna that sometimes goes off, that if it doesn't seem like it's a good friendship or it's a positive friendship, you know your Panther better than any of us and know how to have that conversation with them to challenge what they're thinking or to kind of dig a little bit deeper. Sometimes asking the simple question, do you feel safe? And then asking, are you proud of how you're spending your time at FIU? Are there any actions that you would be disappointed if your abuela found out about? Don't be afraid to use that grandma card. I found that sometimes students will tell me most interesting things when we think about family reputations as well. One of the things that we also think about prevention is that we have some of the most brilliant minds at FIU, and students may have not had to develop skills that they're actually going to need to be successful here. So thinking about how do you help your Panther develop study skills, time management skills, how to build friendships. Sometimes it's really hard not to have the same group of friends you've had for 4 years. How do you navigate and explore romantic relationships and the boundaries that they and others have? And this is a really key aspect as we think about the social and developmental needs of students, especially in that Title IX capacity. And then thinking about the idea of, your Panther may not want to disappoint you. They might have gotten all A's for their entirety of their life, and if they get a B, that's a really hard adjustment to their identity. And so having that conversation of wanting to have high expectations, but wanting to have those expectations done in a very ethical and respectful way. And the other thing is talking about knowing the resources available to you. One of the great things about this orientation is that you will be inundated with a lot of resources, but if you can't remember anything, just think about the Dean of Students. That is going to be a great place as a starting point, and we're happy to refer folks. The second prong of how to help your Panther be successful is support. One of the things I want to point out is that there's a law called the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. This is a federal law that protects the privacy of student educational records. It applies to all schools that receive funds under applicable programs, and that includes FIU. So prior to your student coming to FIU, if they're coming straight from high school, is that if you had a concern about your student, you could call their teacher, you could call their principal and say, hey, I want to know how my student is doing. If you were to do that in the collegiate setting, we would say something that was, I'm happy to talk to you, but your student needs to sign a FERPA release so that I can have the conversation with you. Because now the educational records and any sort of conduct, disciplinary, academic grades, that all belongs to the student now. And I know that's one of the frustrating things, especially as we think about being 18 doesn't mean that you're a full adult, but it does come with rights, and one of those are FERPA. The next thing is to think about supporting your child as an advisor. If your student discloses that they have a conduct case coming in front of them, which, as again, they may not because of FERPA, and they have the right to not include you in those conversations. But if they say, I would really like you to be my advisor, to be my support person, please know that that student has that right. And so sometimes family members or close friends or support persons do a really nice job of advising that student. The last thing is to think about growth and development. The idea that we want to remind students that it's okay to fail small. That if we think about in the course of our lives, we learn so much more from the times we've had to take responsibility for our actions, even if it's uncomfortable, and if it's something that we would not want to do. But the idea is that we're learning those skills of taking responsibility and being held accountable for our actions. The last thing that I think is really important, and I always kind of close with this before I open up for a couple questions if people have some, is that on our campus we have a medical amnesty program. And what this means is that we are putting the health and safety of your students, as we said before, as our preeminent concern. So if a student has been involved in an incident involving drugs or alcohol, they will not be charged under the code with possession or consumption is if they call for help. They call for help for themselves, for others, for the person who they see who just fell across the street. If there's things like drug distribution, we're gonna deal with that separately, but anytime that somebody needs help, please advise your Panther that the best thing to do is call. And so we also think about this in organization memberships, if they're doing overnight trips, if they're just kind of hanging out with some new friends because they haven't really based their tolerance yet because this might be the first time they're drinking. But if there's nothing that you take from this session besides this slide, then that's a really good place for us to be in our campus community. Our contact information is right here. We're in the Graham Center. We're accessible by email, and if you just do a conduct search of FIU, our website will come up. And so I will turn it over to see if there's any comments or questions.